Hi, and welcome to this session on cloud operating models to accelerate transformation. In this session, I'm going to talk to you about how you as an enterprise might want to evolve their traditional operating model to meet the needs of your business and help them innovate faster. Specifically, I'm going to talk to you about why you need to do this transition to a cloud operating model from a traditional operating model. I'll then give you a framework of what that might look like based on the success we've seen with our enterprise customers today. And then whether you've started the journey or you're about to begin the journey, we'll talk about how you might want to get started and organizing your people around a cloud operating model. So why do you need a cloud operating model? Why do you need to change from what you're doing today? Well, the landscape's changing. The way you engage with your customers, the relationships you have changed. Technology has definitely changed. With the advent of cloud, the way you deliver products and services to your customers has changed through this enablement of technologies through the cloud. And of course, in your market or your industry, the landscape from the competitors have changed. Competitors have now entered because of the lower barrier to entry through technology and are able to compete with you on the products and goods and services that you have provided to your customers traditionally. Take, for example, banking. Banking has changed and transformed. Physical branches and tellers are no longer visited by the millennials of today. Everything's done through a mobile phone. And because of cloud technologies, banks are able to create digital products and digital applications so that they can service these new customers and these new relationships through different channels. And at the same time, new businesses and startups such as peer-to-peer lending, micro savings, neobanks, they've emerged in the market because of this lower barrier to entry through the technology that the cloud has provided. And they're not hampered by legacy technology or legacy software development methodologies that the enterprises have. And so why can't today's traditional IT operating model keep up with this? Well, if you look at an IT operating model only, it focuses on technology processes or technology people to generate outcomes of cost optimization, operational efficiency of the systems, and security and compliance, right? But on the other hand, you also have a business operating model. And this is focused on business processes and business peoples to generate outcomes of agility, innovation, and value for the business. And these two are misaligned. You know, there's a tension there. The IT operating model is often misaligned with the business operating model. And it's when the two combine and align together, that's when you create digital products and services. And this is what a cloud operating model can do to help you enable that. The other challenges with traditional operating models is the siloed approach of teams. And so you have engineering efforts, you have operational efforts, and you have that at the infrastructure and the application layer. And so all these different teams are separate, and whenever an application or workload needs to be delivered for the business when they want value, it has to go through all these requests and flows through these teams. And that can create some lags and some time waste, and the time to value is greatly increased and is not reduced at all. And so enterprises are slow to move and slow to innovate because of the traditional IT operating model. And so a cloud operating model looks to address this so that you can accelerate that transformation. And so today, enterprises need to be ambidextrous. They need to be able to optimize at the same time as innovate. You know, Gartner calls this bimodal IT. And so you need to be able to operate in mode 1, which keeps the lights on and optimizes your existing business and infrastructure and IT systems. But at the same time, you've got to operate in mode 2, which is innovation and creating new products and services, new routes to markets to reach new customers. And so when you do the two together, that's when the business is valuable. And so a cloud operating model hopefully can help you do this. And if you can transition from a traditional operating model, this is where you will reduce time to value and your business can innovate faster. What I want to talk to you about now is a framework or a mental model of how you might go about transitioning to a cloud operating model. Just before I do that, I want to tell you a story that will set up this framework. It's about a person by the name of Captain Dave Marquet. Now, for those who don't know who he is, he was a submarine captain and he authored the book, Turn the Ship Around. It's a great book. I encourage you to go read it. And I won't go into the details about it, but he came up with this theory around intent-based leadership and a way to delegate authority and give control to his team. You know, he was operating this submarine and he needed a way to allow them to make decisions fast, but make them in the safe way. And so he came up with this approach where before someone in his team would make a decision, he would ask two questions. He would ask, is it safe and is it the right thing to do? Now, the question about is it safe is about competence. Do you have the skill? Have you had the training? Do you know how to do this activity? And then is it the right thing to do is about situational awareness. Do you have the context of what we're trying to do here? Do you know the mission? You know the objectives? And with these two questions, it allowed and empowered his people to do what they needed to do, and he feels safe without having to control and make every decision. And so delegating authority to him was about two pillars, a pillar of competence and a pillar of clarity. And so we want to use this as a metaphor or a framework for operating models. If you think about it, if we don't allow people to do and have the freedom to do what they need without giving them control, they're going to be quite frustrated. And so if we graph it here, competence and clarity on one axis and control on the other, the developers who have a lot of skill without any control to push code or deploy code will get really frustrated in an environment, especially in a traditional IT operating model. If you think about it, right? All these centralized teams, approvals and process and change management hampers their productivity and their ability to innovate on behalf of business. But on the flip side, if you give them all the control and they don't know what they're doing, they have no skills, you've got a lot of chaos, and it's not going to be safe for your business. They're going to develop stuff that has lots of bugs and issues because they don't know what they're doing. And so there's a balance here, and Captain Dave Marquet puts it really well. You need to tune the control appropriate to the amount of competence and clarity that person has. Well, how do you enhance this? How do you build that? And so with an operating model, we see if you build these mechanisms, if you build these processes to have clarity, to have competency, then you can have a real accelerated and cloud operating model. And so building competency is about not just training, but a comprehensive programmatic approach organizational wide, not just from your technology people, but your business people as well. In terms of clarity mechanisms, you want to build standards and platforms and allow people to choose what sort of tools they want to use, what sort of patterns they want to use when they develop or create applications. And then to add it to situational awareness, do you know what you're doing? Do you have the awareness of the organization's missions? You need to have able to track and trace what's going on. And so you want to have monitoring embedded into all these standards and these platforms that you provide to your developers. And so going a little bit deeper into what a competency mechanism might be, well, here's an example of what we've seen in customers such as National Australia Bank around their cloud guild. They created a comprehensive training plan that not only enabled the technical people but business people, and it was like an academy style program. So you had terms and you could pick and choose a learning path that suited your interest and the skills that you needed to do your job. But it was also underpinned by communities of practice, and that community of practice was important. It allowed them to apply and do what they wanted to do and based on what they learned. And also at the same time, when they had success, they were able to share those stories and share that success with people. And so we've seen this really important. And if you think about it, a lot of the organizations we see, and especially in enterprises who have adopted cloud and can accelerate it, when they train at least 10% of their population in this programmatic way, there's an inflection point. It changes the fluency to a cloud fluency. And that's what you want when you want to have this transformation in an accelerated way. Now, in terms of clarity mechanisms, well, that's how you build the standards and platform. And the AWS suite of products and services allows you and helps you to do this, right? You can use services such as CloudTrail or Systems Manager to operate and monitor your environment. You can use CloudFormation to automate the provisioning process. And if you want to take all the heavy lifting away and have governance while be agile, you can use Control Tower to do the whole thing end to end. And so the aim here is to use platforms such as cloud technologies from AWS to allow you to be agile and have the governance at the same time. So now that you have a framework for how you might build competency and clarity mechanisms in your organization for your cloud operating model, let's talk about the different journey that your people and your teams might go through and what kind of services you want to provide them. And so if you think about developers who are empowered and they got the skills through competency and you're going to give them a lot of control, then you want to build self-service capabilities in the platform. However, if you've got people in the team who are just beginning their cloud journey, but you still want to give them cloud access to services because they're managing commercial off the shelf or legacy type applications, you want to be able to optimize what they do in the cloud. And so a managed service approach or managed services that you manage as a team with your cloud operations team would be great for them in this mode. So you have two service models here, a self-service model and a managed service model, but you provide both based on the journey and the competency journey that they go through the operating model that you provide. And so if you think about the operating models now, we have two main operating models that we see in our enterprises today. One is a centralized operating model and one's a decentralized operating model. The centralized operating model is what you see in Node today. You've got an infrastructure team or a core services team that provide infrastructure services, networking, compute, storage, etc. to application developers and engineers as they need infrastructure services. It's the same when you go to a cloud operating model. They provide the cloud services now. The decentralized model is where the developers are now owning the operations, but also the provisioning of infrastructure services. And so this DevOps notion in a decentralized model is where the developers do infrastructure as code, and they deploy their code, and they actually operate the code as well. So DevOps here is where we see a decentralized model. And so you have the two based on the maturity and the journey that an organization goes through in an enterprise transformation to the cloud. And so if you go back to David Marquet's competency and clarity mechanisms and we graph it, the operating model that's centralized over time, it leads to frustration. Your developers and engineers are going to make a lot of requests now because the cloud is so easily consumable and they want to move fast and they want to move quick, but the centralized team won't be able to keep up. And so the centralized model, we think over time, and what we've seen with customers, becomes a stall and a bottleneck for the organization. And so you want to start transitioning to a decentralized model. And to do that, you've got to give up the control. So you've got to build in these competency and clarity mechanisms, and you've got to give the control to the developers as they build their skill set and they're enabled to do so. And so this is where the decentralized model works, and you give more ownership and more control to operate, to provision. And so that's the continuum you have in the middle there for the decentralized operating model. And when you look at the journey to the cloud, most enterprises are thinking about a migration path, right? And so when they want to migrate to the cloud from on-prem, they're usually looking to either refactor, rehost, replatform. And so these types of migration paths will often lead to a type of operating model. But I encourage you here to think about not the migration path, but actually the business outcome. And so if you think about the business outcome and we want to align the business outcomes with the IT operating model to drive innovation, then we think about it in three sort of categories. And so the first category is sustaining, right? So you want to keep the lights on. And so the operating model that's probably suitable for this is the centralized model, and also providing managed services. So commercial off-the-shelf, legacy applications, you're just trying to sustain them. And so you want to reduce the cost to operate that. And so the centralized model in a rehost is really conducive for that and allows the business to sustain the business. If you're looking to optimize the business and make more efficiencies, then the refactor or replatform migration path allows you to do that. And the operating model here could be either centralized or decentralized, depending on the team, the workload, and their capability. And so, when you want to optimize, we see that this is where enterprises start to make that transition to a decentralized model. For some applications that are being refactored, they reskill the developers, the cloud services team provide them APIs or self-service mechanisms, and they start to operate and provision themselves. And then the third mode for enterprises, of course, to grow and innovate and to get more value and reduce time to value for the business. And so in this mode where you're trying to modernize applications or create net new workloads, then an operating model that's decentralized is appropriate here, right? And so if you think about these three operating models and the different business objectives tied to a migration path, you could have any one of these at the same time. You can have all three, or just one, or a combination of both. And that's okay, because it's not a one size fits all. It depends on the team, the business objective, and then obviously the initiative behind that. But it's important that you use the right model for the right business case. Now let's have a look at how these operating models evolve over time. Let's have a look at the activities that occur and how you might organize the people around these operating models as they evolve. In terms of the activities within a cloud operating model, we see four main categories of execution. We have application engineering efforts, application operation efforts, platform engineering efforts, and platform operation efforts. In terms of application engineering efforts, this is where the application architecture or application config occurs. In terms of application operations, well, it's deployment of these applications and the support of these applications. In terms of platform engineering, the infrastructure architecture and the service config occurs here. And in terms of platform operations, this is where the provisioning of those services occur, the monitoring and support also occurs there as well. Now, in terms of who does what, in terms of these activity lists, will depend on the operating model that you're in. And the developer team or the cloud platform team will have a different mix of what they do depending on that cloud journey that you're going through in the operating model. Now, I mentioned earlier, we have two types of operating models. We have a centralized model and a decentralized model, but they're aligned and they should be aligned to the business objectives you have. And so the three business objectives were to sustain your business, to optimize your business, or to grow your business. And the operating model should align to that to help you align the IT and the business operating model so that there's no tension there and we can reduce time to value for the business. Now, if you look at the sustain motion for the business, this operating model is a centralized model. And in this operating model, a lot of the activities that were mentioned before across platform engineering, platform operations, and application operations are executed by the cloud services team. The application engineering efforts are done by the developers. And so this is a traditional sort of operating model where there's a centralized team doing most of the heavy lifting for the application developers. In the optimized mode, you will have a split of operations. And this is what we call distributed operations or cloud operations. And so the application teams and the developers are now taking care of the operational aspects of the application that they're developing. And so the cloud platform team are really only concerned on the infrastructure services and operating them for the application developers. In the grow phase, this is the decentralized operating model, you will have more activities done by the developers. Not only will they develop their apps and then operate them, but now they can provision infrastructure and operate the infrastructure cloud services that they need for their applications. And so DevOps is the practice here. And so the cloud services team really are only tasked with governance and security efforts around the cloud platform engineering and cloud operational aspects. So now you've established different types of cloud operating models and you transition from traditional operating model to a cloud one. Let's have a look at how the centralized and decentralized operating models evolve over time. Firstly, the centralized model, which is aligned to the sustain initiative of a business. And in this operating model, as we mentioned before, a lot of the heavy lifting is done by the cloud services team for provisioning the platform, operating it, and obviously supporting the application engineering efforts of the developers as well. Now, over time, this could be a bottleneck and it would slow down the capabilities of the business operating in mode 2 and innovating and creating new net services and products for their customers. So you might be keeping the lights on in an optimized way, but this could take a lot of time and tax the resources that you already have in your cloud services team. Now, we mentioned before the two types of service models. You want to either have self-service or a managed service. And so this is a managed service opportunity where you can build automation and a semi-self-service model for application teams who need this type of support in a centralized fashion. And so this is where commercial off-the-shelf legacy type applications can take advantage of a managed service. And so you don't have to have a big team that looks after this infrastructure or these cloud services for them. And so some organizations will build a managed service capability through their own patterns and artifacts and codification and automation techniques, or they would leverage AWS Managed Services, which is a service that we provide that takes all the heavy lifting up operating the cloud platform engineering efforts and the operation efforts in a centralized model for you. And so allowing your cloud services team to go and build cloud service products that will help the developers who want self-service capabilities and for you to innovate faster. And so if we go to that end of the extreme, in the grow phase, we see that this will evolve into more faster delivery, faster shipping of code, and eventually faster shipping of products. And I'll get to what I mean by that in a minute. But if you look at this operating model, the developers are taking more and more activities around deploying of infrastructure, operating the infrastructure, and they're embedding it into the CI/CD pipelines for the applications that they're developing and supporting. Now, if you think about this, if they had a tight line into the business and were aligned to the business initiatives or product teams, they could create these products and ship them quite fast. And so the evolution of this type of operating model is it goes beyond just DevOps, but becomes a product-based operating model and a product-based team that supports the business and innovates faster and reduces the time to market to release products to the customers that they want to serve. So what is a product-based operating model? Well, as I mentioned before, this is another version of a decentralized operating model that evolves over time, but it's concentrating on delivering products, digital products for the business. And so a product in this sense, is something that has a clearly defined interface and drives an output for the customer or consumer that has it. So an example would be an API for a shopping cart on a website, and the consumer of this is either the website itself or the developer of that website. And so the product here is really targeted at achieving that goal for that web developer to have this shopping cart functionality in it. Now that product also is built, owned, maintained, enhanced, and iterated by a small but empowered team. And I'll go into the details of what that team looks like in a minute, but they own it end to end. And so if you think about a product of a shopping cart that happens on that's delivered through an API for this web developer, then you can see how multiple products can evolve from this operating model. Now, I mentioned that a product is built and owned by a small empowered team. And so this team is essentially a cross-functional team. So we're used to traditional IT operations or cloud operations being technically indexed with the resources in those teams, while a product team has a stripe across the business and the technology aspects in terms of resources. So it has anything from a finance person, a product manager, a program or scrum master, the technology architects, the engineers, the application architects, etc. But they're all in one team and they're cross-functional. And the unique thing about this is that they're dedicated. And so that example I mentioned before with the shopping cart API, this team would be dedicated to that product, and they will own and deliver that product. They would support that product and evolve it with feedback from the customers that are using it to make it better and enhance it until it stops adding value to the business. And so these skills and these people, you don't have to look far. They exist in your organization. So it wouldn't take you much to start creating these cross-functional teams to deliver cloud products to your organization and for the cloud operating model that you're trying to transition to in terms of decentralizing it. And so you've got engineers in your organization, no doubt. You've got architects, you've got program managers, you've got business people. It's about bringing them together and dedicating them to this. Now, it's key that you dedicate them, because if you don't, what happens is if you add things to do for them to do on top of their day job, then the product doesn't get delivered and this operating model doesn't succeed at all. And so you can't beg, borrow, and steal and add more to their day. This is their day job as a product team. Now, what does everyone do in this product operating model? Well, if you think about it, every product or every cloud service that will be provided usually goes through a phase of build, deploy, run, and evaluate. And so again, if we go back to a centralized model or a traditional IT model, these would be separate teams for each of these phases with handoffs, ticketing, requests. And so there's a lot of lag and time wasted, and again, increasing that time to value when we want to try and reduce that for the business. In a product-based operating model or a decentralized operating model, this is owned end-to-end by that one cross-functional team. So they own the build right all the way to the evaluate process end-to-end. There might be some centralized services for governance, like I mentioned before, from the cloud platform team, but they would own this end-to-end and evolve it and iterate and improve this as well. So each of these phases can go into much more detail, and I won't go into that in this session. But if we give you a preview of what a build process would look like for a product team, here's an example. If you look on the side there, there's all the resources that I mentioned before that stripes across the business and the technology. Now in the middle there, if you look at all the process flows and what happens in the build phase, you can see the technology aspects in there. There's architecture reviews, the design reviews, the provisioning of infrastructure, security assessments, provisioning of landing zones. But there's also training and enablement. There's also the first part of this process at all is to evaluate the viability and is this going to add value to the business. And so you can see this cross-functional effort collaborating and coordinating to deliver this build process end to end. Now you might think, okay, so if we create these product teams for each of these activities and they go to the organization, how does this scale? What does that look like? Well, a good example is Amazon.com. We at Amazon.com have over 1,000 product teams looking after the Amazon website. And if you look at the screen, we have all these different product teams for search, product teams for the cart, product teams for advertising, and they all own this product, this digital product for the website as an API, as a microservices. This they own and they deploy it and they run it and they support it and they operate it for the person who runs Amazon.com. And this is a way that you can create product teams, you can organize around a decentralized operating model, and they deliver products and services with reduced time to value, and it aligns the technology operating model with the business operating model. And this is how Amazon.com can innovate so fast and create products and services so fast for our customers. And just to give you a scale of what that looks like, this architecture, this operating model, and the way that we create these product-based teams allows us to do 50 odd million deployments per year to the Amazon.com website. So, you probably can't get to this overnight, but if you start thinking about how you go from a centralized operating model, taking away the heavy lifting, creating more automation, more self-service, decentralizing it, and then evolving it to a product-based operating model, you might be able to ship and deliver products and services to innovate fast for your business at this pace and this scale. So in summary, I'd like to leave you with some key takeaways based on today's session. Firstly, you have to give up control. In a cloud operating model, you need to delegate authority. And David Marquet puts it, if you create competency mechanisms and clarity mechanisms, you should be able to do this in a cloud operating model. In terms of the cloud operating models themselves, this will really be driven by the business outcomes you're trying to achieve. Whether you're trying to sustain, optimize, and grow, you might have multiple operating models at the same time, either centralized or decentralized, and it's okay. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The operating models themselves will evolve over time. As we saw with the centralized model, this will evolve over to a managed service or self-service nature to provide services to your application developers. In terms of the decentralized model, this might evolve into a product-based operating model, much like Amazon.com, so you can ship and deploy products as fast as possible to your business. I hope you enjoyed that session. Your opinion would be greatly valued, so please provide feedback at the end of this session. I hope you enjoy the rest of your summit, and thank you for watching.